Hello, folks. Hi. All right. Thank you for attending the 35th Annual National Pesticide Forum. We are really excited to have you here. I hope everybody is doing well and excited, and we got a lot more to go. And thank you very much for coming to this workshop, Strategies for Local Action. We have a lot of great presenters here, but before we launch into that, I just want to give a bit of a framework for approaching policy making and implementing local pesticide ordinances, and show a couple of the tools that Beyond Pesticides has on our website that you can use in your own community. So, it doesn't project. So, really what we're trying to do here is show that pesticides are hazardous to public health, particularly vulnerable populations such as pregnant mothers, children, pets, wildlife, particularly pollinators, water quality. What we want to do is find an issue that resonates with folks in our community, with the people that we're talking to. We also want to convince folks that there are alternatives to pesticide use, and these alternatives are economically viable and can maintain the same aesthetic expectations that the community has. And how are we going to do this? Communication is key. We want to focus on educating people. We don't want to focus on castigating people. We don't want to get angry at the conventional landscapers that we're working with, because we need to bring them along with us as we make this journey. We want to tell personal stories, and we want to emphasize the positive. And really, most importantly, we want to persevere. Local advocates in this room, I'm sure you know, if you're working on these issues, you're going to run into a roadblock. But the key here is to keep at it. Keep at it, and you will get some progress. You will see progress. How are we going to do this? What are the tools that we can use? Form a group. Number one, form a group. Even if it's just you and another person, form a group, and what you do there is you become a political force in the community. You take a lot of pressure off yourself as a person, and you become a political force. Form a group, and once you've got a group together, start a petition, organize a community meeting, write a letter to the editor. These are types of things you can do, and what that's going to do is help you build up public support to find that local elected official that can champion your efforts in the community. You're going to want to find a champion, and once you find that champion, you're going to work with him to write a policy. And Beyond Pesticides has on our website, our Tools for Change website, policy assistance. You can look at a range of policies that have passed in other communities and find various examples that help you write that policy. But even after you've got that policy in place, your job really isn't over. Implementing a pesticide policy is equally as important as passing a pesticide policy, because what you want to do is ensure the long-term viability of your efforts, and you want your policy to act as a model for other communities. And Beyond Pesticides also has assistance for you to work on that. We have a model implementation plan, which you can find on our website, and we also have a list of organic compatible products, which will be helpful with landscapers transitioning to more sustainable and organic practices. So, with that framework in mind, I want to introduce our first speaker, Erin Rupp. Erin has been an informal science educator for her entire adult life and a beekeeper for the past 10 years. She founded Pollinate Minnesota in 2015 to connect students and teachers of all ages to honeybees and to the science and policy and media story of pollinator decline. Pollinate Minnesota focuses on pollinator advocacy, and Erin works with local municipalities and the state of Minnesota to become pollinator friendly. She spearheaded this work in Minneapolis and St. Paul, and also serves on Governor Dayton's Committee for Pollinator Protection. So please say hello to Erin. And I'll bring up yours.
Yay. Thank you, Drew. Oh, awesome. How are you all? Great. We're in what? It's 4 p.m. It's the time of day where like lunch just hits me, so I'm not gonna fall asleep on you, I don't think. So I'm Erin Rupp. I'm saying I realized in listening to Rick Hansen speak this afternoon, a lot of the things that I was gonna talk to you about he mentioned. So this might go really quickly. I run Pollinate Minnesota. Pollinate Minnesota is an organization I started so I'm a beekeeper. I've been beekeeping for 10 years. This is me catching a swarm of bees on my birthday last year. It was very obvious it was my hive that swarmed. I have a yard that has 4 hives, and then there's a tree, and the swarm was in the tree. So it was pretty surely my bees. Is anybody here a beekeeper? Yes. Bees swarm, honeybees will swarm to reproduce. So it's something that they want to do. It's something that healthy colonies do. So Pollinate Minnesota this year, I have 21 hives. And I keep them at different community spaces, and I teach with live bees. So I have a couple in observation hives like this that I bring out to schools and events. Was anybody here on the farm tour yesterday? Yes, excellent. So what we hoped to do was put on beekeeping suits and hang out with the bees, but we ended up looking at the bees in an observation hive because it was a little bit cold. So this is a group of, almost 70 fourth graders last summer. So we put on suits, we hang out with bees together. Since I started, I've taught 15,000 people, and about a tenth of them have been in beekeeping suits working hives with me. So I also do advocacy work. So Drew mentioned I'm on the Governor's Committee for Pollinator Protection. This is me testifying before the House Ag. No, it's an Environment Committee last year. But in Minnesota, I have this one data set, right? Minnesota and pollinator protection in Minnesota. So I'm going to share my story, but just know that it is just, this one state. So part of the reason that I really like talking with bees is because we care about them, right? It's a really tangible environmental issue. Everybody has seen a bee. A lot of us have a connection with bees, right? Some of us are beekeepers. A lot more of us have phobias of stinging things, right? Those are points of connection. And when we talk about the queen honeybee laying 1,000 to 2,000 eggs a day, the drone honeybees are the only males and they die when they have sex. All of the work that a honeybee colony does is female labor, except for that reproduction work the drones do. Those are all pretty engaging points that that bees offer, and that are great points of connection, both in my education work, but then also in my advocacy work. And the other pretty remarkable thing about pollinators is that they're critically linked to the economy of our food system right now. So because we grow food the way that we do, this story is true. Have you seen this picture before? Whole Foods did this maybe 6 years ago. So the picture on my left, your right, is a produce section with everything that just honeybees, this one species of bee, everything that bee is responsible for pollinating, removed. So the picture on your right, my right, your left, is a typical produce section. So that one species, Apis mellifera, is responsible for pollinating a third of everything we eat. And honeybees are not the ultimate best at pollinating, right? They're pretty good. Bees in general are good at pollinating because they gather pollen on purpose to feed to their young. But honeybees are super good at, honeybees are responsible for this story because this is what farms look like. And if you're growing food, and the food that you're growing comes from a flowering plant, and you're growing in a monoculture, you need to import pollinators into that system in order to get that crop. Because imagine that those almond trees on the bottom, imagine you're in that orchard in November. Almonds bloom in February. If you're in the orchard in November, do you have anything to eat if you're someone who eats nectar and pollen? You don't. So beekeepers, a lot of beekeepers, most beekeepers do this work, putting their hives on semi-trucks and driving them around the country. This is another super engaging story, right? This process is worth $17 billion to our annual economy. We would not have fruits, nuts, and vegetables at the price points that we do, and I would argue those are not affordable price points for most of us, right? But without the work of honeybees or of beekeepers. And so Minnesota is critical to that story too. We're the 6th largest honey producing state. A lot of our commercial beekeepers go to almonds in February in California. Some folks go to Mississippi and Texas, raise bees for the industry and for themselves. They come back up to Minnesota because historically it was a great spot here to be a bee. So this story is the reality of our food system these days. It means that the direct points of connection to pollinator decline hit a lot of different things, right? They hit our economics, they hit our nutrition system, they hit our love for strawberries. And honeybees are not the only part of that story, right? In the US, we have over 4,000 species of bee. If you think of all the living species of thing on the planet, including fungi and plants, 1 in 4 of those species is a beetle. There are so many beetles. There are so many insects. And a lot of those insects are bees. And yeah, everybody's having a hard time bee-wise. We have a lot of data on honeybees because we manage them. So as a beekeeper, I check my hives every 7 to 10 days. The Bee-Informed Partnership is gathering data on us as beekeepers. Beekeepers, Joanne, it's due tomorrow if you haven't already reported your beekeeping losses for the year. I have not, so that's what I'm doing tomorrow. But that gray bar, if you can see, bees are animals. Animals die. As beekeepers, historically, we would lose about 15% of our hives a year. The yellow bar is winter losses. So winter in Minnesota is a test. Honeybees make the honey that they make, so they have something to eat and shiver around in the winter. But if you don't have enough honey, if you're exposed to pesticides, if you have parasites, you might not be strong enough to get through the winter. Bee-Informed Partnership in 2010 started tracking summertime losses too. So yeah, we are starting to lose some of our hives in the summer, and that's directly attributed to pesticide loss. This year I went into I started out last fall with 24 colonies, went into the winter with 16, came out with 5. Maybe I'm not that good at beekeeping, right? I've only been doing it for 10 years, but there's a lot of things that are going on that make it tough for me, right? That make it tough for my bees, that make it tough for beekeepers. On average in Minnesota, we lose half of our hives. And Vera talked a lot about why earlier today. So, I was part of a comedy show on Wednesday, but this is a poster they made for it. And I put this in here because Minnesota, as you've heard today, how many folks are from Minnesota in the room? We're doing a lot of amazing stuff for pollinator protection, so we can pat ourselves on the back. There's a lot to do. But we have 26 municipalities that have become pollinator friendly. And you're going to hear from Patricia Hauser from Humming for Bees. Lori Schneider, you heard from a little bit at lunch. She'll be speaking too from Pollinator Friendly Alliance. And Lex Horan from the Pesticide Action Network are all presenting after this on some of the stories behind these 26 pollinator-friendly resolutions. But the main crux of them is to plant clean habitat for pollinators, to transition away from pesticide usage, as we've been talking about today, and then to communicate, to tell other people that you passed this thing. So in 2014, Patricia worked with Shorewood, Minnesota to pass the first pollinator-friendly resolution. And since then, we have 26. So how do you do this in your communities? With Minneapolis, I started Pollinate Minnesota. I had been working a little bit with different city council members on different pollinator-related things. But after starting Pollinate Minnesota, I thought, okay, maybe I have some time. I'll go talk to the city council, get this thing to happen. And Joan was with me, right? We met with the different agencies within the city who managed land, talked to them about the concern that we had for pollinators, the very real issues that they faced, and asked them what pesticides they were using already, if they could transition away from neonic use, where they had habitat. So those sort of meetings are things that, it's city staff job. It's the job of the folks that we elect to meet with us. It's also the job of the folks who work for the municipalities in which we live to hear from constituents, right? These meetings, these are all people, right? They're interested in in hearing what you're interested in. And Drew was mentioning talking to other people, building collective power. And yeah, that's been really an amazing thing to watch here. And I mentioned Humming for Bees, the Pollinator Friendly Alliance, but we all have resources in terms of what to write, what that resolution should be, why that language is good language to include. Do we get handouts printed for this? Wow. So if we did get handouts printed, that last thing that I mentioned, why we use the language we use, is a document I put together. But all this is on my website, and Humming for Bees and the Pollinator Friendly Alliance too. And Drew mentioned Beyond Pesticides resources. So he is, Beyond Pesticides, created this map of the country, of the different folks and municipalities around town that have pollinator-friendly resolutions. By town, I mean the U.S. There's a number of other national organizations. So the top, all but the 3, are national organizations, international organizations that provide resources for folks like us to do the work that we do on the ground. So they have model resolutions, successful examples of other resolutions, and then these best practices that I've been referencing. So here in Minnesota, last August, Governor Dayton passed an executive order for pollinator protection. This is not something that he pulled out of nowhere because he doesn't know how to support farmers. It's something that comes from those 26 municipalities that have demonstrated that they, as smaller governing bodies, care about bees. And it's also something we charged our legislature in 2013 to do a review of neonicotinoid insecticides. Department of Agricultures do these reviews often, and usually what comes out of them is kind of a rubber stamp of the way that they were regulating that pesticide previously, before the review. What came out of ours was a 120-page summary of the science to date that they took 2.5 years to write, and it's an awesome summary of the story of pollinator decline and neonicotinoids. And they concluded that, yep, there's a link there, and we need to do something about it as the agency that regulates neonics. So they made 8 recommendations, and we're at this point now. So I'll get to where we are now. I have 2 minutes left. In the meantime, there's a group called the Minnesota Environmental Partnership that helps smaller organizations like mine collectively advocate for issues that we're all concerned about. They do a poll of us as Minnesotans every year, 2 years. This is one of those years. 87% of us in Minnesota, and they skewed the poll towards rural Minnesotans. 87% of us are concerned about pollinator decline, which is higher than the amount of us that are concerned with water quality this year, which we all care about water quality here, but maybe you can take that to mean the opposite of what I'm saying, right? Like, maybe we don't care about water as much because we care about bees. I think we care about both, yeah. And we care about both because of all the reasons I mentioned at the beginning, right? They're incredibly engaging things that we can hold on to, that we can see and that we like. They're cute, right? These are the places where we are now. So I bolded this one in the middle. 2 of these pieces came out of the MDA's neonic review. So regulating coated seeds in Minnesota. We use neonicotinoids as a seed coating, right, for 94% of the corn grown in the country. Minnesota is a big corn and soy producing state. Those are our 2 main agricultural crops. Tracking those treated seeds here would have been a big deal. We are about a month away from the end of our legislative session, and our Republican legislature removed the treated seed program from all ag bills. So that's not, there's maybe a glimmer that it could be put on the table again by Governor Dayton, but it's likely not going to be in legislation this year. The pollinator protection account would be area within the Department of Ag where they could do these other action steps that they wanted to do. Basically, where we're at now, the Minnesota Senate is not doing anything to protect pollinators. The Minnesota House has a small pool of money. Instead of going to address pesticide concerns, it's going to the U of M. Yeah, which is okay. The U of M Bee Lab is one of the top in the world. I need to stop. If you're in town Tuesday, come to the governor's mansion. And I can talk some more about that when we're at panel question time.
Awesome. Yeah, give it up for Erin. Wow. Thank you so much for you guys are doing great work here in Minnesota. It's awesome that Minnesotans love bees. All right, I'm going to introduce our next speaker. Shaina Kasper is Toxic Action Center's Vermont State Director and also works as a community organizer in New Hampshire. At Toxic Action Center, she works to assist community groups to clean up and prevent pollution issues in their neighborhoods by providing information, networking, and side-by-side community assistance. Please please welcome Shaina. I will get her. Let me get you.
Oh yeah, pulling it up.
Yes.
Thanks. So how many folks here like got involved in pesticide issues because they were fighting something bad that had happened in their community? Cool. And how many people are involved in pesticide issues because you want to make sure that something bad doesn't happen in your community? Okay, both. Okay, great. Just to try to get a sense of like where people are coming from. Because yeah, at Toxic Action Center, we believe, well, this is what I'm hoping to, I just want to share a story of what happened in Maine last year. Was anyone at the conference last year in Maine? Great, it's going to be a fresh news story. Okay, Drew, you don't count. And then also just to share some tips and tricks that we've been learning through the years, things like that. So at Toxic Action Center, we believe that everyone has the right to breathe clean air, drink clean water, pretty radical ideas, that our community should be sustainable and that our government should operate responsibly and democratically. And we work to make that mission a reality by working side by side with community groups that are facing pollution threats in their neighborhoods to win at the local level and then to elevate these first-time fence line activists to become long-term leaders in the environmental and social change movements. So we do this a couple of, and so we've been doing it for 30 years now. That I did not update this slide. That's embarrassing. We worked with over 800 community groups, 10,000 individuals, all 6 New England states. And we do this in a couple of different ways. And so first of all, we help by providing information. So of having form sheets about the different processes that communities can go through in order to get local ordinances or to fight pollution threats at their local level. By having a database of experts, so I'm like so excited to meet all of these great scientists and medical professionals here, as well as policy experts like Drew, who I call up all the time, to just walk through all the different processes that communities have available to them. We also have a database of experts. We have other activists facing similar issues in their neighborhoods. So like how they have the just list of all the different pollinator protection laws that have been happening, to have those different resources as well. But really what we do is by providing side-by-side community organizing assistance through a series of consultations that we run with community groups, so everything from like interpreting test results, campaign planning, media events, things like that. So I'm gonna pass these around in case they are interesting to folks. I think they're pretty useful, so yes, they're all different, so you can take a look. So yeah, as I said, we got started in 1987 working on these really traditional toxic issues. So of making a state Superfund law in the state of Massachusetts. At that time we were called MICCHU. Obviously we are rebranding again, called Toxic Action Center. And then as we kind of did that first initial rebrand, realized that there are a lot more issues than just these traditional toxics issues that were threatening people's health and the environment, and were issues that local communities could address. And so we now work on issues like waste, on fossil fuel infrastructure, and of course pesticides. So here's kind of just where I want to start this story is, so in 2014, that's our main community organizer Andy there, who was involved with a community group, Protect South Portland. They passed the Clean Skies Ordinance to stop a tar sands pipeline from going through their town by passing a local zoning ordinance, which was a pretty exciting defeat of ExxonMobil at the time. And at this time in history in South Portland as well, they had a city council with a bunch of environmental champions that they had gotten elected. And the group had just a lot of really experienced environmental activists at this point. So they beat ExxonMobil, and they were like, what's next? What are we going to do next? So we facilitated a conversation where Protect South Portland decided what to do with all of this people power that they had built through the campaign. And so in doing some of this research, the group really came to a consensus around working to fight tidal wave of pesticides that have been used in the city and other towns around Casco Bay, because the numbers, as you guys know, are just staggering in the increase of home use and pesticides in Maine the past 20 years. It's not like they're fighting an invasion of army ants or anything. It's really just the success of conventional lawn care industry. They sold us the idea of the perfect weed-free lawn and then sold us the chemicals to get us there. So you guys all hate pesticides. I'm not going to go into that. But all of this stuff in particular in this area in Maine ends up in the ocean. And this map really shows Casco Bay and South Portland as the star, and all the little boxes are all of the pesticides that are ending up in the water. And the updated stormwater tests were showing that even more hits for milk-cloprid, for example, is one of those neonicotinoids that you guys know all about. These are toxic to other insects, but what's like a really big insect that's Maine's kind of well known for? Anyone? Lobster, yeah. So Maine also is, so they had one of these first strategy meetings to figure out how to move forward, and Maine is one of these really special places where you can pass local pesticide regulations, and it's not being preempted at the state level. And it's been tried and upheld already, working with other community groups there. So I'm the Vermont State Director, and we're still having a lot of trouble getting people to pass local ordinances because it's opening their community up to an onslaught of lawsuits from the pesticide companies. And so this map is from Beyond Pesticides, which we use all the time, which is great. And so in Maine, picking the strategy was pretty easy, wanting to go forward with a campaign to pass a local pesticide ordinance. So Protect South Portland got a new kind of campaign under that umbrella group name called Bees, Bays, and Backyards, also jokingly referred to as Bees, Babes, and Backyards. And these are the lawn signs, which Rachel Berger, the founder of the Protect South Portland group, drew. And these really did double duty. They not only spread widespread support for the ordinance, they also represented a commitment from that homeowner not to use the dangerous lawn chemicals. So these signs were all over town, and city councilors, the decision makers, saw them all over town and all these people who are against these chemicals. But the community group was not the only ones all over town. The conventional lawn care industry created an AstroTurf, or a fake grassroots campaign effort to fight the ordinance. This was their website, which is pretty embarrassing if you take a look at it. They hired a lobbyist to attend all of the city council hearings. He was pretty slick. He was definitely out of his element testifying in South Portland's tiny city council. He didn't have the personal connections with the decision makers that the group had established over the years of campaigning on the tar sands pipeline campaign. And the last thing that they tried was to introduce a bill to preempt the local control over the pesticide regulations. Initially that really just didn't fly, and a diverse coalition came out against this bill. Everyone from Toxics Action Center to MOFGA, the Maine Organic Farmer and Gardeners Association, to the Maine Municipal Association as well, wanting to keep that local control. So at the time, the bill really just didn't make it out of committee, but the AstroTurf companies just continued to plug away. So you guys might recognize this guy who just spoke. So as the industry was doing their thing, the community group was doing ours. So one of the services that we provide is networking with experts, some of the great guys who you've been hearing here. And this is really a turning point on the campaign, having a panel of experts to speak. So explaining both the federal, the regulatory, how the regulatory system is failing us, talking about how you can get that perfect lawn without pesticides, things like that. And at this meeting, every counselor made a strong statement in favor of the ordinance, and they assigned the city staff to actually write it. So it was a pretty exciting meeting. So they, after fast forwarding 15 months, it definitely did take longer than we were initially thinking it would take, which I'm sure you guys all have experience on as well. And so now we've been working with a number of other community groups in Maine and at the state level, as you guys have been hearing about a little bit too, to take this town-by-town approach to reduce lawn care pesticides and to promote smarter and safer lawn care. So as far as just like the going over some of these principles of winning campaigns that we go through with community groups, if you picked up one of those workbooks, you can follow along right there. This is just kind of some of the tips that we've done through the 30 years of doing this community organizing work. And one that I'm going to be talking about is Lake Iroquois. So this is right around the corner from where I grew up, where I go swimming every summer. It's just like this great lake in pretty rural farmland Vermont. It got dredged up a lot, and there's a lot of milfoil in the lake. And so after decades of a pretty lackluster fighting the milfoil, this November they put in a permit application to spray or to inject the lake with sonar, which is fluoridone. So they've been doing this in a number of different towns across. I work in Vermont and New Hampshire, and so that's really where I know the best. But this really has been hitting home for me because this is my lake. Like, this is where I learned to swim. And so I'll just kind of try to use this as an example as we're going through some of these different principles. So first of all, when setting achievable goals, having them be achievable and differentiating between the long-term goals of the group with the short-term goals and the steps along the way. Wanting to know where you're going before you develop the plan for how you're going to get there. So in Burlington, Vermont, we worked with a community group that wanted to save the bees. This was literally the goal that they had brought me in to help them work on. And so instead of having them set an achievable goal of passing a neonicotinoid pesticide on town property ordinance in town, which is not on your map, Drew, so I'm gonna have to get that one to you. And this can be really hard. So for example, in Newberry, Vermont too, we were fighting a fungicide spray gone awry that drifted over 2 miles on either side of this lake into both Vermont and to New Hampshire. Some of the people in the group wanted the farmer to stop spraying altogether and move towards organic practices. These were ornamental pumpkins, and so they were like, it's not necessary. But other people in the group just wanted them to not spray so close to the school, and saying this was a one-time thing where they had messed up the spray. And it really, the group needed to come together around what their goals were before moving on from there. The second one is to have choosing the right decision maker, having limited time and resources, wanting to choose the person who can get you what you want. And so in our experience too, we would always encourage community groups to have it be a person and not just a body. So for at this, in the Lake Iroquois example, there is, the Lake Iroquois Association, who's actually the permitting process. There's the select boards who are the actual people who then wrote the check to deliver the permit. But then there's also the state's Department of Environmental Conservation Watershed Management Division. And there's the person who actually oversees the permit. There's their boss who signs off on the permit. There's the commissioner of the Department of Environmental Conservation. Then there's, the Agency of Natural Resources secretary. And then there's the governor, who is the only elected person in this whole process. And so really wanting to be able to do all of the research at the local, state, and federal level to find the right person to get you what you want. Third is wanting to take a step back and to think about your theory for why you think you can win. Your rationale for why your efforts will work, and to be able to explain it to other folks. I'm sure all of you guys have been doing this, but it's sometimes you only notice it when it's not happening. People want to join a winning campaign, so being able to explain really clearly and concisely of why your campaign is winnable and is going to win can be really helpful. And one way that we think of this too is about determining the type of campaign that you're launching. So if it's going to be a hero campaign, you're upholding the decision maker for, we think that they're going to be doing the right thing. So for the example in Newberry, that's what we ended up going with, was that we really want them to, we think he's gonna go organic, so we want to applaud him for, for considering organic fungicide use on his pumpkins. But then also, or to be a cover thing. So that's what we're doing in the Lake Iroquois example, is to pressure the commissioner because we think that they're on our side, but the way these permitting processes are is just to continue to rubber stamp these permits. And then the one that people tend to gravitate the most to is just the typical pressure campaign. So I think just if we're twisting their arm to get the farmer to stop the spray near the school or whatever it might be. Some of these like local corporate type campaigns. Fourth is securing the support of your community. You know, we do like to think still that democracy still works, and that when your town is on your side, you're more likely to win. And so we explain to community groups that there's really two ways of getting power. Has anyone heard this before? Do you know what are different ways that we can get power for your community group? No? Money and people power. So if you have money, that's great. I would love to meet you. But oftentimes, we're really just left with people power, right? And so what the problem that we're dealing with is a political problem, that there's someone in government who can push that button. And they're not just going to push it because they have all of the facts, but instead, needing to really show them that there's a lot of people on their side. And then we show that we have money on our side, too, by getting, some of these businesses and getting business endorsements, and by getting really important key people. So here is at we have a Pesticide Action Vermont Coalition, which is over 50 different farms, community groups, businesses who are all working on local pesticide ordinances and working on state level regulatory processes as well. And so we had the future lieutenant governor come to speak there while he was still running to this coalition, and just to be able to show who is actually in power. And I'm out of time already. How'd that happen? I'm going to whiz through some of these other ones here too, really quick. So of building your group as you along the way. So just in Fern Lake campaign where they were doing an adulticide spraying, so killing adult mosquitoes, which is like a horrible idea. It's hugely ineffective, and it's designed to drift. So just bad idea. But it was one woman fighting for years to try to stop this adulticide spraying, and so the town forefathers could just write her off as being this lone wolf nutcase, this hysterical woman. And so by building a community group and getting petition and getting people to speak out, they were able to stop it. Escalating your campaign over time. Wanting to actually knock on the door of that farmer in Newberry and to ask him to not spray his pumpkins first, before actually then resorting to legal measures. Sounds obvious, but you'd be surprised. Crafting a strong message that's concise, compelling, consistent, controls the frame of the issue. Just a couple of examples. And then just to evaluate as you go. And this is too where when folks win or lose, but most often win on their local campaigns, then to get folks involved into the larger environmental and social change movements, whether that means working on statewide policy reform or working on something completely different, like working on the tar sands group, then going to work on pesticides. So that's me. We'll talk later. Thanks.
At the end, yes. We'll get there. All right, thank you so much. That was really helpful. I learned a lot there. Okay, next we have Ruth Kerzee, the Executive Director of Midwest Pesticide Action Center. MPAC is located in Chicago, but works regionally to reduce the health risks and environmental impacts of pesticides by promoting safer alternatives and the development of municipal and state policies. Ms. Kerzee has over 2 decades of experience practicing public health, including conducting research and training programs on health issues such as childhood lead poisoning and migrant farm worker injuries. So please give a nice round of applause to Ruth. Pull up her. Great. Awesome.
Perfect. Thank you. Hi, everybody. So I have to take out the decades out of my bio because it's aging me. But actually, I'm only 30 years old, and so I started working when I was 10, just so everybody knows. So yeah, thanks so much. I'm very excited to be here. I'm just going to figure out where to put my stuff down. There you go. To be here presenting for Beyond Pesticides. Beyond Pesticides has been very helpful to Midwest Pesticide Action Center. Formerly, we used to have a different name, Safer Pest Control Project, and we're very excited to be here to present with them today. So I'm just going to give a little perspective on MPAC and particularly how we've come recently to a campaign that we started. And I'm not going to precede it by telling you what it is yet, but anyway, I'll just give you an idea of what we do as an organization. So Midwest Pesticide Action Center works to reduce the health risks and environmental impacts of pesticides by promoting safer alternatives. Now that is a big mission, okay, because pesticides are used in so many different places. For example, we work in all of these different environments. So we're not just focused on agriculture. In fact, we don't really do much with agriculture at all because we're based out of Chicago. So we do urban pesticide control, right? But pesticides are used everywhere. So we're talking childcare facilities, on school playgrounds, inside schools, in housing. And then in the top left-hand corner, we also touch a little bit on pollinators, and there's a lot of outside use in general of pesticides. So this is a really tall order for an organization of exactly 2 full-time people and sometimes some part-time help, although we are hoping to grow as we move forward here. So we need a way to communicate better. And what we discovered, and we also do advocacy and policy work, right? So we pass ordinances, we get amendments passed downstate, et cetera, et cetera. We do all the things that Shaina and Erin have talked about here. But we have a big problem, and that problem is getting attention, right? So we are just so all over the place. There's so much pesticide use all the time. People just, you know, hear our voices, and I feel like they tune us out a lot. So we have a big problem getting attention. So what we have done, our solution, our recent solution, is to really focus on using doing environmentally friendly lawn care or natural lawn care and get people's attention that way. Why? Because if you think about it, these are pretty pictures, aren't they? They're nature, they're flowers, it's housing. People like to see these pictures, okay? What people don't like, oh, and puppies. You know, you can talk about puppies. You can always have a puppy in there, right? So very pretty, very cute, very engaging. But this is a pest that I used to focus on all the time because I did indoor schools work and housing, you know, like public housing work and integrated pest management. Nobody wants to talk about these, and nobody wants to see these pictures, okay? So when I go into a room, and I do a lot of bed bug work, which is, you know, super fun, and people love seeing those pictures. People don't want to see this. People don't want to talk about it. People don't want to talk about it to their friends. People do not want to be associated with it, right? Even though there is a lot of pesticide use going on here. So what we determined is that this outdoor area was where we wanted to focus. And so we created an activist toolkit, and the activist toolkit is here, okay? It has a lot of the same things that the toxics folks have in their thing, I'm sure, but ours is only online. We did not print it. And that's all based on natural lawn care and how to get sort of activists going and getting the issue addressed in your community. And then it has, you know, a list of all those things, right? So that's a nice list. You can read it on your own time. And then there's retail education that we decided to do. So retailers sell a lot of the stuff that people use on their own lawns. People never read the labels, right? And so we wanted to educate retailers on that. And we got a nice grant from Boeing, and they wanted the focus to be client-friendly backyards. And so we created, of course, what everybody does. You do the trifold, right, with all the information in it. And we tried to focus it on climate-friendly because that's what the funder wanted, right? So we did climate-friendly. It's a little bit of a stretch in some ways, but we did the best we could. And then we were also doing work with pesticide-free parks, okay? So pesticide-free parks, what did we do? We engaged, we got a lot of resolution passed in different communities. We've had parks commit to pesticide-free parks and all of that. And we create more stuff for people to read, right? And they look pretty good, right? And they have some pretty good basic information. And we're really proud of them, and we're happy about it. And then we also get a municipal toolkit. Why? We put that together because municipalities don't only want to do pesticide control on their outdoors, but they want to do it on their indoors. And so we put this together, right? So now we've got just tons and tons of stuff. Oh, I'm sorry, I forgot about community engagement. There's also community engagement, so this is just for the average homeowner and what we want to message on them about. And so what do? We create more materials for people to read, right? And you can see they're nice, right? They look pretty good, but there's nothing really connecting them, okay? There's no story here. And here's a nice little quote, and this is by a gentleman named Tom Smerling. He does a lot of work on climate change education for NOAA and other organizations. And story is how we are reminded and how we remember. We are not built to memorize lists or unrelated facts. We are built to remember narrative. And Erin stated that very well in her presentation, right? Pollinators are a perfect narrative for talking about reducing pesticide use. So having that narrative, and she's focused entirely on that. We're not focused just on the pollinator. We're talking about pesticide use in a lot of different varieties. So us coming up with a narrative is a little bit more difficult, but we wanted that. We wanted that narrative, that connection between these programs. So we came up with this logo that sort of an advertising campaign using a lot of the same tools that industry uses, right? We wanted something super recognizable with a big pop that would connect some of these things together, our outdoor programs together. So when people see this, Midwest Grows Green, on one thing, they see it on all the other things that are related to outdoors, our outdoor pesticide, urban pesticide use, right? And so we started doing that, and so then we went on to create an umbrella for all of our programs, basically. So we have a point of purchase program, that's the retailer education I talked about. We have pesticide-free parks, and we have community engagement, but they're all Midwest Grows Green now. So we only have to talk about one thing, Midwest Grows Green. And the other thing, and then we created a website, and here they are, all three under the umbrella, we call it the umbrella, of Midwest Grows Green. And the reason for this, to some degree, has to do with behavioral science as well. So behavioral scientists will tell you that people have to get information multiple times in multiple different ways to make the real connection to actually make change. Getting up in front of people one time, and I've been doing this for a number of decades now, getting up in front of people one time and giving them a long list of information is not going to create behavioral change. They're going to have to see that information again someplace else with a trusted source, right? And they're going to have to see something in another location again, and then maybe after the 20th time, and it's an average of 12 times, seeing information, they will actually begin to make that behavioral change. So by us putting all of these things under one umbrella and putting them in multiple locations, you start to create that memory in people that this is something that they may want to do and start doing. So we created, this is our retailer program, so we created these materials. You can see that the guide itself has the Midwest Grows Green logo on it, and then we made shelf talkers and shelf tags that retailers can put in their stores. So somebody coming to buy the products, and they would put these by the environmentally friendly products, and that guide tells them where it is, and et cetera. And I could talk about that forever, but you can see that there's some branding going on here. Then, they put it up in their stores, and you can see it. Those aren't the greatest pictures, but you can see them in the stores, and we give them the guide, and we make a, this is Ryan. Ryan's right over there. And he's been the ambassador for this program, and he's doing an amazing job, so we're really happy about that. They adopt that program, and hang on one second. Not sure why that popped up. What do I do? Just click anywhere? Oh, yeah. Okay, sorry. So then it's there. We create a map to show people where these folks have those, and so people can go to see it, and the retailers want that because it's advertising for the retailers, and people can go there and see where it is. Then this is our pesticide-free park sign. This is one of them. And then there's another kind. We have two kinds of signs. Again, the Midwest Grows Green is on it, so you have that connection between the parks. And the idea is all three of these programs can be rolled out together in one community or in pieces. You roll the pesticide-free parks program out, then you get the retailers involved, and then there's also some community engagement, which I'm getting to, which is this, to commit your lawns, to pledge your lawn pesticide-free. And if you do that, you get not only a newsletter, but this Keep on the Grass sign that tells people come. And again, the logo is right there. So you're out in the community, you see your neighbors have Midwest Grows Green. Your retailer has Midwest Grows Green. Your parks have Midwest Grows Green. And you no longer have to read those lists. okay? Now you have read it once somewhere and you see that logo. This is how advertising works, okay? You drool when you see McDonald's French fries because you have a memory of it, right? And that is what we're trying to do here with Midwest Grows Green, is really use those advertising techniques for change and meaningful change. And so what we do with this program, and I don't know how much time I have left, but then we engage the community. So we have activists out in the community, and they're interested in Midwest Grows Green. They're interested in the outdoor spaces, right? And so we do a lot of education with it. We create events. We call them kickoff events in parks when they go pesticide-free, and we have games, and we have all of that kind of stuff. And then guess what we do? We wedge the door open to start talking about other pesticide use issues, right? Because this is happy stuff. Look how happy that is. There isn't a rat anywhere to be seen in that. And that way we say, oh, you know the pesticide use that they're doing on your school grounds that you're really concerned about? Well, guess what? They're using a lot of pesticides inside too. So let's work on those. And so that's how we get our foot in the door to work on the issues that are not so pretty for people. And at the same time, we are sustaining the change that we want throughout the community by branding everything. And then finally, the interesting thing too about this whole process, so this has only been 18 months that we've been rolling this out essentially, and we've gotten really good success with it. We're really, really thrilled, and of course there's always room for more success. But one of the things that came from it was when Ryan was out there in the community talking to people about this, then he was called into a room with the True Greens that were providing the services or whatever. And we realized that what we needed to do is create something where people who are managers of land can come and talk to other managers of land that manage the land the way we want them to be managed, but they are managing land, right? Ryan and I are not, I don't manage land except for my own home. So I'm not managing large tracts of land. So we wanted to bring together people who were managing land naturally or had a lot of knowledge about that and bring them with the people that were transitioning to managing the land properly, right? So you have park districts who really, a lot of those guys really want to manage their parks properly, but they're worried about community support. So Midwest Grows Green does help to build that community support, but they also want to make sure they're doing the right thing. So having the Lawn and Land Forum, we've had 3 so far, have been very successful. Between 35 and 50 people have attended every webinar, and that's been really great to pull that community together as well, to have one resource for folks to come for a lot of the information that they need. So in the past 18 months, you know, we've had a lot of success. And the most important thing about the success that we've had for us right now as an organization is the fact that now we have funders that are listening to us, right? And for every organization, you know, as Shaina mentioned, you know, you either have people or even money, and we want to have both. Right now we have kind of the people power behind us, and now we're trying to go for the money, and having these systems in place have really helped us define what it is we're asking for also when you put that all together. So that's super important too. And that's about all I have. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ruth, for those tools and strategies. That was incredibly helpful. I'm going to introduce our next speaker. Mark Liebaert is the board chair and chair of forestry for Douglas County, which has a long-standing pesticide ordinance. He was also the past chair of the county's Land Conservation Committee. He owns and operates a 108-year-old, 600-acre family farm. He and his family grass finish and direct market their Angus beef from the farm, and they do not use herbicides, pesticides, antibiotics, or fertilizers. He's also a board member of the Wisconsin's Farmers Union. And please introduce Mark.
Thank you. He gave you a pretty good introduction of who I am. Hi, Jan. Good to see you. One of the things I guess that I wanted to tell you about here is that, hold the dang mic up. All right, I hate that. All right, one of the things I wanted to tell you is that we've all been being educated the last couple of days and continue to be educated on what we can do or as far as the ill effects of herbicides, pesticides, and stuff like that. I think that this may be one of the most important meetings that you may have because it should empower you to take that learning and actually get it into action. It doesn't do us any good Sorry. It doesn't do us any good. I talk with my hands, it's going to be a problem. It doesn't do us any good if we learn how to, all right. If we learn what is wrong, if we don't know how to implement it and actually have policy. I mean, us being educated in this room is kind of like speaking in the choir. Until we can go out and preach to the other people and the elected officials and to become effective, it really doesn't matter. So this workshop, I think, of all the workshops you're going to go to, it's too bad there ain't more people here, is probably the most important one. Yeah, I bet you that looks good. All right. Back in 1994, Douglas County, by the way, has almost 300,000 acres that Douglas County owns. We have like 8 parks, hundreds of miles of ATV, horses, snowmobile trails, hiking trail, cross-country trails. We have camping parks. We have day parks. So when Douglas County in 1994, think of that, 1994, that's over 22 years ago, Douglas County passed an ordinance against the use of herbicides and pesticides on our property. I'm not sure there's anything up here. Nope. Okay. I'll read it to you. Douglas County Board of Supervisors recognizes that the use or misuse of pesticides may have profound effects upon indigenous flora and fauna, surface and groundwater, as well as unintended effects upon persons frequenting treated areas for recreation or other purposes. Therefore, it is our express policy of Douglas County to refrain from the use of pesticides upon property it owns, uses, or controls, excepting only under the such situations posing an imminent threat of serious injury to persons, property, or agriculture, or where the proper use of pesticides will have a minimum impact upon a treated area, water resources, or persons as frequent it. The result of that is that for 22 years, pesticides have been used very sporadically or very minutely on Douglas County. Part of that ordinance, and I think it's 6 pages long, was to have an exemption process. So if we run into a problem, and most of our problems are DNR and orientated. DNR comes in and they all have identified an invasive species that they think will cause a lot of problems if it's allowed to go out. Most of the areas that we allow treatment on after a long permit application are usually the size of this room. So for 22 years, the Douglas County Board is made of 28 members. And sitting in the back, Dave Conley was one of the members. He's older than he looks. Was actually here in '94 as a member of, I would say, there was 3 Green Party members. And Dave Conley is one of the ones that's still on the board. In fact, I think he's the only one that was probably on the board that was pushing that. There was probably 3, 4 other members who actually passed it at that time. Dave. Sure.
I appreciate your advocacy, and Mark is our county board chair. You probably said that. I just got into the room, and we appreciate his leadership on the county board. But this ordinance was developed largely through the efforts of our forestry committee at that time, and Mark is also chair of our forestry committee, and we had a chairman on that committee, Lauren Sloan, who saw the value of this. And Mark is also an organic farmer. I don't have to speak for you, but it's an accomplishment in northern Wisconsin to be a farmer and being able to make it, and Mark is able to do that. So again, we appreciate what you do, Mark, and I'll let you get on with it here.
Thank you.
He's a politician.
I got one, Jan. Thank you. So I guess not only to give you the faith that you could actually work an ordinance like this through your local thing. I mean, we heard the mayor get up there and say that they'd like to restrict it, but what she didn't say is we're going to prohibit it, which is what Douglas County did 22 years ago and has done it since then. And I guess if you think about it, 22 years ago, most of the board members that actually debated and passed this are no longer on the board. So if you can enact a good ordinance with good science behind it and people behind it, it should be sustainable, because it doesn't do no good for you guys to have an ordinance enacted that, let's say in the city of Minneapolis, that you can't use it on on public property, and then 2 years from now the council changes and all of a sudden they take it off the books. So it has to be crafted and with good enough support from the public that it'll be sustainable. And again, I say, think of that, almost 300,000 acres in Douglas County. The foresters, and it's good that you reminded us that it came from the forestry department, because that's our biggest obstacle. Our forest is run as a business. It's an enterprise business, and we cut about $5 million worth of timber off there. We have about a $2.5 million profit. We use the money of that other $2.5 million goes to offset taxes that are in lieu of the towns that are in areas. About $500,000 goes to the towns. We also run the parks. All our recreational programs come out of that money, and the foresters' salaries, of course, come out of that money. So our forest as an industrial component is important to us. And the foresters often try us to say, you know, all the other county forests, all the other private forests, all the state forests uses herbicides on their property for establishment of new plantations, let's say. And we always say, you know, if organic farmers can figure this out, you guys are well educated, we challenge you guys to figure this out. And in most cases, they look at us like, oh, crap, here we go again. And we always turn them down because our ordinance is pretty explicit. It says we can use it basically in emergencies, but we can't use it because it's cheaper or more convenient. And we turn down, like, typically we'll turn down like ECE, which is a big power company who wants to come through and spray their lines through county property instead of clear them by hand or by machine, and we turn them down. They threaten sometimes to sue us, but as far as I know, we've never been challenged in court in 22 years on this. Been threatened many times, but never been challenged because of the way it's written. We have a preemptive state, obviously. We can't do it on private land, but we own enough land that I think it's of significance that it's important to you guys to see that it can be done. I mean, when I look at Minneapolis and I think, wow, why can't you guys do it in Minneapolis? I hate to say that. Why can't you do it in Minneapolis? You got a pretty good crowd of people who want to have that ordinance move forward. Here we are in a rural or semi-rural area in Douglas County, northern Wisconsin, and 22 years ago, they were actually and I'm not sure, Dave, who wrote that ordinance, but it's obviously ahead of its time. 22 years ago, to have that mentioned in the ordinance, which we were hearing today, basically, and advocating for those types of language. So there are models out there. I'm sure there's other places. As far as I know, there's only maybe one other county in the state. I think that's Dane County, Madison. I think they have a prohibition on their property. But it's easy to have a prohibition on property if you only own a couple acres. But if you own 300,000 acres, that's a pretty significant statement. And I would encourage you guys to use us as an example. 28-member board, and in Minnesota, their supervisors, your commissioners, as they're called in Minnesota, are paid a pretty substantial wage. We're basically volunteers. Several $1,000s a year for I'm talking $2,000, $3,000 is the most that most of our supervisors make in a year. Yet they stood up against what would probably be considered a big corporate interest and passed this. And it flowed downhill. Several years ago, we fought a power line, actually stopped a power line after being offered $2 million to allow it to go through our county forest. The state, because we did stop it, and the state then passed a law that took away our right to stop a power line on public property. Specifically, it took them 2 weeks and I think $2 million in bribes, but they did it. And so we lost that right. But again, our county board stood up for what was right, and the citizens backed us. And I know somewhere, I think it was you that said, somebody said, you know, be careful when you fight a fight, make sure it's a fight you can win. One of the things that I said during the fight was, we can't choose if we can, a fight based on whether we can win it or lose it. We have to fight it because we think it's right to fight it. So I want you guys to feel a little empowered with all the information. I'm glad I came here because I got a lot of new information, especially on bees and stuff, and hopefully we can come back and we can come up with maybe some bee pollinator rules or stuff like that. We have a CAFO prohibition for 18 months that we put in, or 12 months with another 6 months extension that they put on when I come on the county board. I asked for that. We can't prohibit CAFOs in our county because of the state preemptive, but we can fine-tune the manure storage ordinances, which we have the right to do, which would make it a little harder for the CAFOs to live under our laws and our ordinances. And we're going to be passing them, I believe, in May and June if they're done on committee. So one victory tends to lead to another one. So I would encourage you guys to go back after that mayor. I mean, I heard her. It sounded like she was pretty much in support of what you guys wanted. Make her follow through. Make her show the fact that there are other municipalities out there that have went to a prohibition. You guys can live with that. I think she can live with that. And I guess that's all I got to say. I'll wait the rest for questions. Thank you.
All right, we're going to take questions. And thank you very much, Mark, for showing that these policies have staying power. Great, I'll let you guys pass this around.
Yeah, I was going to ask Shaina, first of all, if Bernie is for bees, but I'll save you for that question. Instead, I'd like to find out from Mark, what has happened in the course of those 22 years? Has there been any demonstrable less use of herbicides and pesticides as a result of the original ordinance, so you can change the wording in that ordinance and not have any emergency care of that with pesticides or anything like that?
Well, and remember, I think, why it was put in there. I'll give you a good example. After Japanese knotweed was found in the middle of our county forest on a logging site, and the DNR was brought in and recommended a couple different methods to get rid of those Japanese knotweed. And in that case, it was important to eliminate it. It was in a spot smaller than half of this room. We had a guy on staff who was trained enough that he could do the application. It was well, no pesticide is non-invasive, I guess, but it was a pesticide other than 2,4-D, let's say, and we actually allowed that to happen. So I think it's important to have that part in there, because we never know exactly what the next challenge might be, and in some cases, the challenge might be the only way to meet it is an exemption on it. Give you a good example, the County Forestry Department has invasive species on one of our parks. I'm trying to think of the ones I asked about, the trees that we were talking about that they were being eaten by the goats. We funded 2 experiments. There's another one in the fall. 3 different treatments of goats to try to see if they could remove those invasive species from that park. We ran into somebody who had never really done a lot of this before, but was trying to make a business out of it. So it was good that the county was willing to try those things. So I think the exemption allows us maybe to actually compare sometimes, because the county is actually planning on maybe having an experimental site to compare what the goats did to what a herbicide, an actual wipe-on herbicide would do to trees after they were cut. I guess I feel that, and I would never use herbicide or pesticide on my property, but I feel that as a county board forester, a head of the forestry and a head of the chairman, there are exemptions that might require us to do that.
There hasn't been enough change in the 22 years to modify the initial ordinance.
No, I would say, and I might be a little wrong, I would say we've only probably given half a dozen exemptions over those years, maybe. And most of them actually come from the DNR. I'll give you a good example. Enbridge was rebuilding a pipeline, and the DNR had come out to do it because it went through a natural area, and the DNR was requesting some invasive species be removed by Enbridge during the process of them reworking this right away. Enbridge came to us and they wanted to use a herbicide. DNR supported a herbicide. We turned them down. They came back with more information, and the DNR said that if they used a mechanical clearing of that right away instead of a spot herbicide, they were going to kill a bunch of endangered species that were also in that site. So, with the recommendation of the DNR invasive species manager, and of course I've learned a little bit more about that today, or yesterday and today, maybe the exemption wouldn't have come so easy, but at that point the committee thought it was better to not kill the native endangered species and to give them a chance to do spot treatment on the invasives.
Yeah, now I'm going to talk, Mark. I'd just like to say that sometimes when you do this ordinance like we did, it has multiplier effects. Right after we did this, maybe within a year, we had someone on the Superior City Council, and they brought it to the City of Superior Council, and they also passed the ordinance. So that at that time it became, the county lands and all the city lands, which includes the parks and the libraries in town. And then also at that time we had some progressive people on the school board, and they passed it through the school board as well. So at that time, and I think, as far as I know, Superior still has their ordinance in place, and as far as I know, there has not been any change in the school ordinance. So it kind of took the whole community and put it on the same track. So I would, include, or, I would really encourage people trying to do this to you use that multiplier effect and try to bring other entities in.
And to show you how valuable it was for Superior, Douglas County has the biggest state or county forest in the state, the third biggest in the nation. The city of Superior has the largest municipal forest in the nation. So there's a lot of acres that are involved in those two public identities by saying no to pesticides. And I'm not sure what the city, just to show you, the city's now facing a emerald ash borer invasion in the city of Superior. And they are probably considering whether they should be spraying some key trees or whatever. And as far as I know, they chose the last time they're cutting them all down. They're not going to try spraying any of them.
So I have a question about, we've been talking, it's come up a lot in the past few days about, we're preaching to the choir kind of in this room. So as far as some of your most effective kind of techniques for crossing that divide, because obviously it's easier to bring someone along who's pretty much almost there. How have you best addressed those people who are just like, and granted, there are those people that just never will, and you don't want to focus your energy there, but how have you brought others along that seemed resistant at first?
I can just weigh in with this one content point that I have, which is pollinators, right? Yeah, I mean, so we've tried these kind of harder asks in Minnesota at the state level, and in a lot of ways, the municipality asks are a smaller ask. We're a preemption state, so a municipality cannot regulate anything to do with pesticides more strongly than our state government. So at its best, these resolutions are pledges to do right by bees, and a piece of that pledge is pesticide reform, right? Because we know that this class of insecticides is part of the pollinator decline story. So that's one point that I don't know that I made that clearly in my presentation, but that's part of the reason why I find bees so engaging, because they're kind of a good entry point. And a piece of that puzzle, the planting flowers piece of the puzzle, is way more apolitical than the pesticide piece of the puzzle. So if your municipality needs to start with flowers, you can come back after you have flowers and say, and we need to consider these pieces, right? Because pollinators are still having a hard time. And that's something that we had this excellent opportunity here at the state level to do this pretty exciting pesticide work. It hasn't moved in the way that we wanted it to this legislative session, but there is this idea that, well, what if we just plant all the flowers and then we have the data that shows that bees are still dying, and then maybe the folks who are farther behind on the pesticide policy will come along. But the worry with all of that is that we don't have that much time, right? Like, yeah. So, yeah.
And I'll just say too, just differently, is that we work where community groups are already organizing. We need folks to come together and to organize as a community group, and we work where human health and the environment intersect. And so we do that for a couple of reasons, and one is what you said very clearly, is we have stories, and we need to have really good, clear stories to help organize their community, and then to work for longer, in social change. And so, and I think we do a lot of work one-to-one with some of these community members and community leaders to help them develop their story. Not just the story of their campaign, but their personal story about why they themselves are involved in these pesticide issues. And it can be, as personal and as, profound as they feel comfortable getting vulnerable with, if it's in the media, or if it's with their community group, if it's that their, school farm got sprayed with, pesticide drifted onto the school garden, and so their, kids' tomatoes died. That's a story which has gotten people engaged. And personally, it's that my parents were pesticide applicators, and when my parents were pregnant with my siblings and me, and 2 of us kids have type 1 diabetes. And as you've heard about the the connections, it's there's no causal link. It's part of a spokes on a wheel, but that it's something there, and that there's, you know, being able to develop these stories in ways that can hit home with people and to get people engaged beyond that like intellectual inspiration, but to, you know, really drive at the gut and at the heartstrings are ways to keep people involved.
So I'll just add to that and say that, so our organization, we do a lot of work with institutions to move institutions to their own policy change. So, you know, we do local governmental work and statewide governmental work and engage nationally where we're needed. But we do really try to get institutions that are managing lots of properties to create their own policies and then figure out how to follow through. And sometimes the biggest challenge there is getting those that are managing the systems to understand that there's community support for doing, first of all, the right thing, or what we would consider the right thing to reduce overall toxic exposures, but also that there are resources out there that they can draw from to be able to do that. And once we engage sometimes very resistant managers, because they are so afraid of community pushback when a dandelion pops up or whatever. Believe it or not, dandelions cause so much issue for these folks. It's unbelievable. But as soon as they realize that the science is sound, that they can manage these things, and it's interesting because those managers are people who have some training often, and sometimes they even want to do the right thing, but they've gotten the impression or information that they're not allowed to do it. And so, you know, when we're working with the institutions, it's to take those managers and put them in connection with the experts, and then they realize there are doable things that they can at least start moving towards. So we are always emphasizing transition. So that's what Erin mentioned also, is transitioning them. So, okay, you're afraid to stop, you know, putting fertilizers, broadcasting fertilizers. How about we go to spot treatment of things, you know, because they've been doing weed and feed everywhere or whatever. And just giving them that opportunity to start transitioning and engage with the experts has been helpful for us.
Just share one more thing, I guess, because we've been, on a county board here, we've been involved in a couple contentious issues. And one of the things that I always try to tell people is nobody's coming to our rescue on this issue. Nobody's coming on a white horse to take care of this. We can't count on somebody else to do this work. And you have to empower yourself to take that initiative and to be that person that community moves that community forward in the right direction, recognizes the plane. We all recognize the problem. Very few of us will take the next step, which is to champion the cause and to push it long enough. I mean, and I'm going to literally tell you, we were involved in almost a 10-year fight with that power line while I was on the county board. Almost a 10-year, we drove over 100 miles every 2 weeks to a meeting with a group, and that group stayed in that fight for 10 years. And we ended up winning it, but then we lost it. The government took away our right to fight it. But that was one of the things I always made sure. You are the person that's going to win this battle, because nobody else is going to help you on it.
And yeah, just sticking with it too, right? Yeah, if you get a little bit of a step, then don't leave before it gets to be more of a step. And you're going to hear from Lori Schneider and Pollinator Friendly Alliance, and they've been doing a lot of work in Stillwater Township and Washington County to make the resolutions in those spaces mean what they pledge to mean. Yeah.
Oh, yes. Hi, I'm Alan Cohen with Safe Grow Montgomery, and I just put on my T-shirt to show that it's not just, I think there's great stories that you've told here, but we definitely worked in a coalition, and there's names on my shirt of all the members here. So we had watershed groups, we had Audubon Natural Society, we had, you know, a lot more than, but we had about 50 organizations when we finally got this, I don't want to call it a ban, it's a restriction on cosmetic use of pesticides. And we are continuing to call on these members to help us out when we need them to, you know, send a note to the county officials. And I think, you know, Drew's been very effective too at helping us out with the, you know, some of the details. The implementation is it's not just passing a bill, but it's getting it implemented correctly. And we're still struggling with all these exemptions they want for invasive species. So it's going to be a struggle, and every year they have to do a list of the invasive species that they want to treat with. And so it's going to keep coming back to the council, but you do have to keep in it for the long run. But I also want to say that we do have help from these other organizations that we can call on if we need an email blast to council or to the Department of Environmental Quality.
Yeah, I just want to add one more thing about the stick-to-itness. Just a little story of what's happened to us, where we have community members that reach out to us and they really want our help. Often they're not exactly sure what they want our help with, and then once you get into it, there's some sometimes pull away. Like we've had some experience where the community gets a cold feet, or the activists get a little bit of cold feet because the board is being mean to them, the school board is being mean to them, or whatever it is. And so our role as an organization is really to help support them and take that heat off of them when we need to. So we use them, the activists, to get in the door, but then we do try to step in and be the heavies to take the pressure off of them, because we don't necessarily live in the community right where they are, and so it does help them to be able to stick to it, because they can sometimes get a little scared about the pushback.
Hi, everyone. The role that I've been playing up until now has been on serving on boards with ecological organizations, education awareness, inspiring activism, and only recently, and I'm talking about the last couple of months, have I tiptoed into local city politics. And the only reason, and it's what you're saying, we are the people we've been waiting for. And because I'm in Minnesota, and every Minnesota city right now, all you Minnesotans out there, is working on their comprehensive plan for the next 10 years. And so, if I can be a positive influence for that as a scientist also, and I'm finding myself, I don't know, combination of shy and awkward and fumbling and bumbling, and so so much that I don't quite know what my question is, but I'm looking for some kind of tips. I had this lofty idea that every city in Minnesota would have a preamble that that we are the guardians of the commons, and we are working with a precautionary principle, and that kind of idealism, and it's so if you can help people such as myself get real and grounded and do something of practical value in this little window of opportunity.
First of all, I would allow people to do what they're best at. We had a guy who was very good at giving presentations and doing the facts, and then my job was to get up there and fire them up sometimes and talk in front of a crowd and chew them out maybe, or to get them to work. And I use a good, in Minnesota, some of you guys must know George Crocker, North American Water Office. He's been fighting environmental issues since he was a conscientious objector in the Vietnam War. He's the longest serving prisoner of the Vietnam War that we had, and he lives in Lake Elmo. Very great guy. I think he's kind of retired from the North America office now, but he still has issues. I bounce things off him all the time. And I said to him one time, George, how do you continue to get kicked? For every step forward you make, they kick you back too, and you just keep coming back, and from issue to issue, you just keep fighting and fighting and fighting. And he smiled at me. He's got a big, long Santa Claus beard now, and he pulls it, and he says, Marky, he always calls him Marky. Marky, he says, Marky, he says, once your eyes are open, you can't close them. Then he pointed at me, goes, and your eyes are open. So I think you have to recognize what every individual can do best. He would sit back often in the background and watch us have arguments or in debates between what we were going to do and who was going to do it. He'd just smile, and I'd go up to him. I said, George, I apologize for us having a fight. He said, that's how it works. You guys got to work it out together. You got to find out what each one is willing to do, which each one is best at doing. I've shut down 2 Public Service Commission meetings. Just so you know, one in Minnesota and one in Wisconsin. my wife was listening to it on public radio when when she heard my voice and them looking for the cops, and she said, "Oh my God, my husband's in jail." I always carried $500 cash on me because I always thought there was going to be a time I'm in jail. So just nobody should do that except me. I was the guy that would do that. I would shut the meeting down, and George would smile. I mean, it was great. So just pick what you are best at. Don't go out of your real comfort zone. Find out what you do best. It might be educating.
The other thing is to be patient with yourself, right? Like, all these folks work for us, and they will listen to people who are there for the first time or for the 10th time or the 100th time, and the folks who are there for the first time have their ear way more than somebody who's there multiple times. Yeah, I started this work because I had a pesticide kill at one of my hives in Minneapolis, and we whirled into the Capitol and got 2 laws passed. And that's a crazy data set too, right? I haven't gotten any laws passed since then. But is that true? I think that's true. But it's terrifying at first, right? They're really fancy. They're in these like very weirdly designed rooms, so you're in a spotlight, and it's okay to be terrified and be kind to yourself and recognize that you're being very brave. And also that these people work for us and that they should be terrified of you speaking up.
I will reiterate that one thing that I hear people talk to us all the time about being afraid, and I think one thing to really remember is they're just people. I mean, we tend to put them on pedestals for some reason because they have an official title, but they really, really are just people, and they definitely may know nothing about what you're talking about. So, yeah, and so anything you say sometimes is better. The other thing I always tell my activists, because often there are very lofty goals, which is great. You want a really you want to achieve. We want a pesticide-free society, right? And that's our goal. But you have to give yourself credit where credit is due for the small advances that you make and the small successes that you have. And I always tell my activists that too, because sometimes they can get very, very frustrated. So when you go in with a law that has a list of things and it gets eaten away, and you only pass, a third of what you thought you were going to pass, celebrate that third or whatever, and don't, you can mourn the 2/3 that you lost, but then you got to pick yourself up and move on and be happy with, at least for a while, with that third that you got. So that would be my advice.
Oh, well, I just want to throw in something then. If you look at where the decisions are made, they're made in the big umbrellas of the federal government and the state government, and quite frankly, they don't represent our interests really very well. They're bought and paid for by whoever put them in office. Largely, it's big corporate donors. Still not loud enough? Okay. And they're going to represent them first. So in the area of pesticides use, and I see that in the description of this little workshop, it's what can we do locally to protect our communities. Really, you have to get elected. And it's just like what happened in Douglas County. We had some supervisors on the board at that time who were open-minded about what we have, and we have several hundred miles of corporate-controlled right-of-ways going through our county, both pipelines, because as the pipelines come out of Canada, they cut right through our county. Also, the other utility lines cut through our county, and they would dearly love to just spray all those areas from the air with nobody to question it. But this ordinance that we put in place in Douglas County, because we had some county board members who were open-minded about it, that prevents them from doing that. They have to come for authorization for this sort of thing. But one of the things we had, in addition to the county board members, were community members, some of them who pick berries. They pick blueberries, raspberries, they collect mushrooms, they collect other forest products, and some of them heard about what was happening with the ordinance, and they rose to the defense of that ordinance. So you had community members at the grassroots level, you had open-minded elected individuals, and without that combination, I think it wouldn't have happened. But it's really important, really important. If you're going to take care of your own yard, you have to get elected to do it. So, and it's fairly easy to do. Most of those contests, they're looking for candidates, and most of them are nonpartisan. And with just a little organization and a couple of issues, you can be heard, and the media will help promote you, and especially if you're a good news item. And that's what I think it takes to work. You have to get elected to that local office, then you're on the inside, and you get to vote on those decisions.
Sure, yeah, oh, absolutely. I'll give it, we're just right about out of time.
I just want to add, like, I testified twice at the Capitol recently against the ban on our plastic bag ordinance. And being prepared and practicing with someone else, I mean, this is that really nitty-gritty place where you're in front of people, and they're trying to be intimidating. They're trying to rush us, and when I saw them do it to other people, I was more prepared. And of course, then some other things came up that I wasn't prepared for, and it doesn't have to be perfect, but even just like, get a couple friends and say, I want you to be the guy who pushes back this way, and you to be the one who pushes back this way. And it just, you feel more ready emotionally and, you know, psychologically.
Or go to a couple of hearings that you're not testifying at and just see how they go.
All right, thank you all so much. This was a great conversation. I hope everybody is inspired, is going to go back into their communities and get local action done, pass local pesticide policies. Thank you all so much.